In today's session, Innocent Wafula, Jeremy Tan, Prateek Taneja will take us through KQL framework for Microsoft Sentinel, empowering you to become KQL-Savvy. Innocent and Prateek are program managers, and Jeremy is a senior program manager, all with the Microsoft Sentinel team. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to them. Innocent, Jeremy, Prateek, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jason, and thanks everyone for joining us today. If you have interacted with Microsoft Sentinel for any length of time, I bet you'd readily agree that the Kusto Query Language is fundamental to the solution. That's because KQL shows up in the product across analytics rules, hunting queries, workbooks, and sometimes even playbooks. While not everyone needs to be a KQL expert to get value from Microsoft Sentinel, it definitely helps to understand the language, especially if you are either a SOC analyst or a SOC engineer. This webinar aims to make that learning journey easier by providing a framework that structures the learning process in a way that is more aligned to use cases relevant to Microsoft Sentinel. And so, before we go any further, I want to point out that this webinar is not about teaching you more KQL operators or more KQL functions. It's about introducing a new framework to make it easier for you to become KQL savvy, particularly around Microsoft Sentinel use cases. My name is Innocent, and today I have the pleasure of co-presenting with my colleagues, Prateek Taneja and Jeremy Tan. To cover the topic for today, here's the agenda we shall be following. We'll start off by looking at the challenges that people face across various proficiency levels as they embark on their KQL learning journeys. We will then take a look at the typical learning journey as it stands today, and after that, we shall propose a change to the learning path. We will then introduce the framework to support this new learning path and showcase why we chose a workbook as a platform to host this new goodness. We will then take a quick tour of the workbook and follow that up with a scenario walkthrough that will showcase how two personas in the Security Operations Center could benefit from using this new framework. One will be a junior SOC analyst, the other a senior SOC engineer. We shall then wrap it up with a summary. The challenges. From a proficiency level standpoint, the feedback we typically get from folks that consider themselves to be at the beginner level are things like they have learned some commands but are not sure how to apply them, or the materials are focused on the commands themselves but not on how to use them. From folks in the elementary category, what we are hearing is that the resources are there, but they are not directly focused on Microsoft Sentinel use cases. When it comes to people who consider themselves to be in the intermediate category, the feedback is that KQL examples are available, but difficult to locate the ones they need for security use cases. And lastly, from the folks in the advanced category, their perspective is they are aware that the use cases can be fulfilled via KQL, but they find themselves spending a considerable amount of time trying to find relevant samples that they can use to get started. So now let's look at how the typical learning journey looks like today. This is the path people often take as they seek to learn KQL. They start by learning KQL commands. They find additional KQL samples. Thirdly, they find specific use cases for reference. And lastly, they learn to apply the knowledge based on consolidated samples and references. What we now want to propose is a little bit of a shift. And here's the approach we suggest that people could take to learn KQL aligned to Microsoft Sentinel use cases. Number one, identify consolidated samples and references. Two, find specific use cases for reference. And thirdly, learn the KQL commands. And then finally, find additional samples. I'll now turn over the controls to my colleague Prateek, who will introduce the new framework to see how it can support the proposed learning journey. Prateek, take it away.
Thank you, Innocent. Let me quickly share my screen. Right. Confirmation. Are you able to see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. So, yep, thank you, Innocent. And now that we know the intent behind creating a resource that can help you in your KQL learning journey, let me now introduce you to the framework or the blueprint of the Microsoft Sentinel workbook that hosts all this content of importance and how it's structured to be effective in pushing you up the ramp in building and practicing your KQL queries. Now, Jeremy will take you through a workbook tour in more detail in a bit and show you the different options that you have and how you can browse or navigate throughout the workbook. But let me first set the stage for Jeremy and taking you back to the proposed journey that Innocent spoke about. The idea is to start from a use case based samples or reference and then eventually build and fine tune your KQL queries. And with that approach in mind, we start with the categories. You can also see the list of categories in the screenshot on the right of your screen. The process that we are effectively trying to advocate is that you break your use cases down and see what category references you might need, and then build your query block by block. And this is what you'll find in every category. One is the overview. The overview is basically a description of what this category is about. So you get a sense of what you'll find inside. Now, each category is then divided into layman use case language, or as we call it in the workbook, the I want to sections. Now, these are generalized into what you're looking for to build your queries and how you would verbally define what you're looking for. Now, this could be a complete use case in itself, or you might be able to break it down into smaller chunks to put your use case together. Within every I want to section of the use case, what we have is one, the commands or operators that you'd probably be using to achieve the objective that you're trying. Some simple sample commands to get you warmed up for more complex or sophisticated use. Then you'd see some samples of use cases on how you can use the simple queries or operators in a more complicated or sophisticated KQL query or a use case that can eventually help you achieve the use case objectives. Lastly, we have some references or samples of how these operators are used in Microsoft Sentinel at this point in analytic rules, in workbooks, or in hunting queries. Now, before we take a tour of the workbook, I want to address the elephant in the room. Why did we really choose this to be consolidated inside a Microsoft Sentinel workbook? Now, the obvious advantage of using the Microsoft Sentinel workbook is the fact that workbooks are native to Microsoft Sentinel, and it makes the overall experience very seamless. In addition to being native, Microsoft Sentinel workbooks allow for an interactive experience as well for better or smoother navigation. Another extremely useful component of this workbook is that it allows you to run the sample queries that are available inside each and every section on the fly without the need or the hassle to navigate back and forth between learning materials, which could be different browser tabs, and then come back to the Microsoft Sentinel portal to actually exercise them. You can run the queries directly from the workbook, and Jeremy will show you how. You have the flexibility to run the queries on the data set that resides on any of your own log analytics workspaces, or run them on the demo environment, which outside of Microsoft Sentinel is usually accessible from aka.ms/LA demo. Now, important thing to note here is that the results from the queries are subject to logs or telemetry or events being available in the workspace that you're running your queries against. So just be mindful of that. Microsoft Sentinel workbooks also allow for additional flexibility. So if you intend to consume it as a learning resource internally, users can add and extend the content accordingly. It's easy to share. So you can share the workbook JSON with anyone you wish to share it with, and these are relatively easy to import, and you can quickly get started with using these. And In addition, like most Microsoft Sentinel resources, it can be deployed as code as well. I will now invite Jeremy to help us put all the pieces together, starting with a workbook tour. Over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Prateek. I will now share my screen. Right. Can someone confirm that you can see my screen?
Yep.
Great, thanks. Now, I will do a quick tour on the workbooks. So this is the workbooks that we have developed, which align with the KQL frameworks that both Innocent and Prateek mentioned. Now, first of all, you notice that there's a list of categories, right? Today we have 12 of them. And at the top menu, we have a overview where you can click on it, and this will give you a quick overview and a guidance on how to use this workbook. Now, below the overview, there is a parameter for you to select workspace. I'll talk about this later. And let's move on to the right-hand side. So at the top right corner, you find table of contents. So this will be useful for you to explore what are the contents available in this workbook. As you can see, there's an extensive list of contents over here. And on the bottom right corner, there is a link for you to submit feedbacks. So we would like to hear from you on how we could improve this further. Now, let's click on one of the categories. So let's say if I pick the first one, and which is aggregation. And as you can see, this align with the framework format that we have discussed earlier. First of all, you get the overview on what is this category about. And then you get a list of common tasks, or what we call the I want to tasks, right? So this is the list that we verbally define. So that for any new user, so for example, if you would like to perform converting, let's say, dynamic array value into rows or columns, so this, you will be thinking about this verbally, but the answer would be MV expense. So for new user, you might not straight away think about the operators, right? So this will be the task that you'll be after when you construct your query. Now, when clicking on any of the I want to tasks, you'll notice that we have a list of operators that will help you to perform the task, and we will include sample queries, right? And you'll notice that all the sample queries are related to Microsoft Sentinel or security use cases. And if I scroll down, you get additional use cases. So this will be, the real, use case or example. And scrolling down further, you can see that there is a button over here, right? So all the queries that we provide in this particular workbook, for example, in this specific section, all the sample queries and the queries in the use cases, you can actually run it in real time, right? So we allows user to run this either in a public demo environment. So there is a public demo environment called LA demo. So this LA demo is not a Sentinel enabled workspace. So that's why earlier Prateek mentioned that it depends on the data source. Not all the data source will be available for you to run it in the LA demo. But if you prefer, remember I talked about this parameter over here. You could select one of your own workspace. And then you can just select that, for example, and you can see that there is another button, right, available immediately. So this will allows you to run in your own environment. So by clicking the button, you see that there will be a log search page. And then all the queries, as I mentioned, all the queries will be carried over to the log search page. And because this is leveraging the safe query link, for sharing, so there's a limitations that all the queries have to be in a single chunk. So we have provided instruction on how to separate the query individually. So there is a line break over here. You just need to separate them, and after that you'll be able to run the query individually. So for example, I can just click on this and I can just run this, and you notice that I can get the results on the fly, and I'm not navigating away from the workbook. So I'm still within the workbook. So that means I can close this log search page and go back to the workbook and continue with my learning. And besides that, we also compile a list of the relevant sample found in Microsoft Sentinel. So it could be analytics rule, hunting queries, or workbooks that we have in Microsoft Sentinel. And all these samples will be related to the task that you would like to perform, or related to the operators that being used within the task, right? So they are all related. Now, if you click back to category, so that will bring you back to the main menu. And of course, you could always do a search in the table of contents to, as I say, to find out, an overview of what's available in this particular workbook. All right, so this is a quick walkthrough or a tour for these workbooks. So next, let me go back to the slide. All right, so next, let's demonstrate the workbook's capabilities with scenario walkthrough. We'll learn how we could leverage this workbook, either to learn KQL effectively using a use case driven approach, or increase your efficiency in KQL authoring. Now, in this scenario walkthrough, we will introduce two fictional characters, Alex and Jack, both with different KQL proficiency level. First, let's get to know them and find out their daily tasks and use cases around KQL. Then we will explore how we could leverage this workbook to address their needs and challenges. Let's begin with the first persona, Alex. I will now hand it over to you to do a quick introduction.
Hey, I'm Alex. I'm basically a level 1 SOC analyst, and I've recently been tasked with writing some new hunting queries in Sentinel so we can go about hunting proactively. But I'm a beginner with Kusto, and my lack of experience with KQL has been rather limiting me. I mean, I know how to write these queries, and by writing, I mean how these are structured, and the syntax for these queries. We start with the table names and apply some elementary basic filtering with the where clause. But I'm a beginner, right? I'd love to get more proficient. I'd love to write more sophisticated queries. Where do I start? How do I get started? Is what I'm trying to explore.
Hi, Alex. Sure. Let's talk more about what you have at hand, and then we'll see how the workbook can help you find a way. So tell me about the use cases you need to write for the hunting queries.
Sure. We actually have a couple of use cases I have a couple of use cases that I need to write. So there's a list of restricted locations that our organization maintains, and I need to write a query to identify the Azure AD sign-in logs that originate from these restricted locations. And I have another use case that deals with critical assets. So I need to write a query to identify the critical assets that have alerts raised from Microsoft Defender for Cloud. That's the two use cases I need to work with.
Interesting. Do you know where this list of restricted locations and critical assets is maintained?
Yeah. So the list of restricted locations is basically a watch list in Central itself. But the list of critical assets we maintain in a storage blob.
So it appears you have multiple data sources to correlate. The Azure AD sign logs with your restricted locations watch list, and then the Microsoft Defender for Cloud alerts with the critical assets blob.
That's right, precisely what I'm what I want to do. But I want to start with understanding how I can best use KQL operators, because it's so new for me. So I can get to a point where I can write these correlation queries. But tell me about this workbook. How do I navigate across? How do I really find what I need? And I don't know, where do I start?
Great, let's explore your use case together. So let me go back to the workbook. All right, so let's begin. Let's start working on the first use case. So your first use case is to identify Azure AD sign-ins from restricted locations, and your restricted location is maintained in the watch list. Am I right?
That's right. Yeah.
All right. So since you are using Watchlist, we have a category of using watchlist data. So the first steps obviously is to explore how to correlate watchlist data. As you can see, once you click on this category, you get a list of you get a overview and also a link to the documentations. And also, when looking at the list of I want to, I can see that the number 2 item, which is correlate watch list item, this looks like something that meets your needs. And this is just part of the solutions, right? For your first use case, you also mentioned that you need to identify Azure AD sign logs, right? That will give you the locations for the correlations. Now, have you looked at how the records of the sign logs looks like?
I did. If you can open it, open a sample log, I can show you the exact problem that I'm looking at.
All right, so here are some of the sample records from the sign logs.
Yeah. So if you look at,
I'm scrolling down.
Location details, yeah. I mean, if you see that, it looks like that isn't as straightforward as a string. It's a dynamic field, and unpacking this field is, I don't know, it's not easy for a beginner like me.
Yeah, I understand what you mean, because the location details is a dynamic field, so that's why you can see that the values is being packed right in dynamic format, which is JSON. So obviously your need is to extract either city or state or even country from this view. Am I right?
Exactly. Yes.
All right, so let's go back to the workbook. Now, back to the category. Seems like what you need to do next is to perform parsing, right? So you need to extract the individual values, right? For example, like city from the location details. We do have a parsing category, so I'm gonna click on that. And of course, we do have the extract entities from fields. And let's scroll down. Now we do have a sample for your requirements. So this is a sample on how to extract city, state, and country from the location details. So what you need is to refer to this example, and together with the sample query that you saw under the watch list. So you'll be able to work your way towards the solutions.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So if I understand that right, if I can lay it out, what you're trying to say is, when I start with the use case, I try to break it down into smaller chunks and then try to look for an appropriate category. And within a category, I'll find the I want to section. What I'm looking for exactly is the closest match to my use case, and then I put everything together to build a more sophisticated query, if I can frame it that way. Is that what you're trying to say?
Exactly. Now, keep in mind that this workbook is not a cheat sheet, right? So this is a learning resource that meant to help you by providing samples and also use cases. So you could leverage the sample in these workbooks, and while learning, you could work your way towards the the final KQL queries that will meet your requirements.
Makes sense, but I think it at least gets me started. So that's good. It's good. Can we try and apply this approach to the second use case that I need to draft a query for?
Sure. So let's look at your second use case. So your second use case, as you mentioned earlier, is to identify critical assets, right? With the alerts raised from Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and you maintain your critical assets list in the blob storage. Am I correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So first of all, how do you identify the alerts from Microsoft Defender for Cloud?
They, I think, land in the security alerts table.
All right, so let's examine table. And again, I will take random 10 records. And all right, so let's see. And how do you, differentiate or identify the alerts actually coming from Microsoft Defender for Cloud? Are you looking at a specific field?
Yeah, I think it's that field, the provider name. I think that's the one capturing the service where it's coming from.
Yes, yeah. I can see that. So this is Azure Security Center, which indeed is the provider name for Microsoft Defender for Cloud. So as you can see, compare to the previous example, this provider name is a string value. So it should be quite straightforward. So what you need to refer to is the the filter category. So by clicking on filter, again, you get the overview. So what you need to do is check out the perform simple filter on string. So here you find the operators that you might need, and together with the sample queries, you just need to refer them and works your way towards the solutions. So this is for the first part, right, of your second use case, which is to identify and filter the alerts raised from Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Now you do have a requirement to correlate the results with the critical assets, which is stored in the external data source, which is a blob storage, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, so now for correlating with the external data source, it might not look obvious on which category to choose from. Now, one of the methods is to look at table of contents you can actually leverage the search feature in the browser. So let's say, for example, if I search for external, you could see that there is a external data operators being used in the sample. So this column is represents operators used in samples. And although the category is for IP address, right? But let's look at the samples available in the IP address. So let me just close this. So I will click on the IP address category, and let's look at, I believe it's this one. All right, so you can see that we do have sample for correlating with external data source. Now you notice that in this example, this is actually correlating with a GitHub repo, right? Not with the blob storage that you're looking for. But there's a link here to the documentations. So let's check out the link over here. Let's see if we can find any sample for blob storage. And here you go. So there is a sample for blob storage, and basically you can just refer to the sample here. Again, you just need to do a tweak or modifications on the sample query, together with the security alerts table that you saw earlier, and for your solutions.
Makes sense. And I noticed you clicked on the operator and took you to Microsoft documentation. Is that the case with all the operators under each category, each use case?
That's right. So so every link that or every operator that you see, so they are linked here that will bring you to our Microsoft documentation or the Kusto documentation. So at any time you can just click on the link to read more. But just want to highlight that the sample in the documentation will be a generic sample, because as what Ines mentioned earlier, KQL is being used in not only in Sentinel, right, but in various Azure services as well. But then you'll be able to refer to the sample queries or the use cases, which all of them will be related to Sentinel or security.
Makes sense. This was really helpful. I think one of my senior colleagues, Jeff, had some questions that he wanted to ask as well. Do you want to start off, Jeff?
Yes, indeed, Alex. I do have questions of my own. Jeff Leatherman is indeed my name, and I consider myself to have intermediate knowledge of KQL. I use the language regularly for my day-to-day tasks as a senior SOC engineer in my organization. Now, my need at the moment is I'd like to write some detections pretty quickly because we have an upcoming MITRE coverage audit, which I certainly don't want to fail. My problem is that I need to write these queries in a short time, but I feel like the KQL samples in the documentation are a bit scattered across various resources.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for the introductions and sharing your challenges. Can you tell me more about the queries that you need to write for detection rules?
Sure. I'd like to build two queries. The first one should detect anomalous activity to sensitive resources, while for the second one, I'm looking for a way to create rules for multiple scenarios, leveraging the same data source, but with different filter conditions. How can the workbook make my life easier in addressing these requirements?
Sure. Let's go through your scenarios using the workbooks, and we'll explore how you could leverage the example in the workbook to speed up your KQL authoring process. So I'll go back to the workbook. So let's work on the first use case. So you mentioned that you would like to detect anomalous access to sensitive resources. Now, I did see that there is a keyword that matches with our category. Can you try to make a guess which category it would be?
I'd say anomalies.
Yeah, that's correct. So we do have a category for anomalies. And again, if I just pick, let's say the first one seems like the one that meet your requirements, and you'll be presented with a list of operators related to the built-in machine learning anomaly detections. And with the by aligning with the frameworks, you have sample queries. You also have sample use cases. And guess what? I can see that for this first use case, it's kind of similar to what you're after. So you're looking for the sensitive resource access. But this, although this sample use case is, referring to the resource creations. But I think you can just, leverage this and perhaps do a quick modifications by changing the, resource creations to resource access.
Thanks. That's a good place to start. How about for my second use case?
Yeah, sure. So for your second use case, which is create rules for multiple scenarios, leveraging the same data source, but different filter conditions. Now, may I ask, what is the data source that you'll be working on, and what are the fields you need to filter for your condition?
Yes, so I'm looking at Azure Activity as my data source, and the fields I'm interested to filter around are Azure Activity, or activity status value, resource provider value, and the subscription ID. I need to build multiple rules based on a few combination of these values.
I see. So looks like this is something that you could use functions, because for functions, you can create parameter. So since you mentioned that you'll be filtering 3 fields values, and I believe that it depends on the combination, right, of the value. So what you could do is you could look at under functions, there is a task to create or save a query as function for reuse purposes. So this looks like something that that you after. And in the example, you find that, so the first one is how to create a function without parameters. But if you scroll down, you can see that you learn how to create functions with parameters. So for example, this is a sample to create a function with a single parameter. And if I scroll down further, there's another sample with 2 parameters. Now, I know that you need to create a function with 3 parameters, but what you could do is you could just refer to these samples. And it does come with some screenshots as well. So try to modify it, add another parameter to make it 3 parameters. I believe this would be a good place for you to start.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeremy. I really like what I'm seeing here. And I'm actually thinking I could use this as an internal training tool for my team.
Yeah, so initially when we built this workbook, we had this goal, we had this in mind that we would like to allow user or customer to use this as a training material. So user could use this to deliver training within their organizations, or even partners or vendors, they could use this to deliver KQL training for their customers. And if it requires, because it's a workbook resource, you can always edit the workbook and add your own contents. But one of the benefits is you can use the interactive features that we have. So for example, I've shows how to run the sample query, right, on the fly. So basically, you could just run it in your own environment, your customer environment, for example. You just need to filter it with the parameter, and then just just change just remove the line breaks over here to separate multiple queries into individual query. And if requires, you can actually modify the query on the fly. So for example, you can can make any changes immediately, and and that would allows you to execute it on the fly.
Great stuff. Now, so what if I wanted to suggest improvements to this workbook? How would I do that?
Yeah, great questions. Now we so all the feedbacks are welcome, and we are actually planning to work on the second version of this workbook. So we really would like to hear from you. Now there's a link over here that you could reach out to us directly and submit your feedback. So yeah, so please go ahead and try this, and and provide some feedback. Once you have used this, we would like to hear from you.
Nice. Now, I'm sure this is the first time you're hearing this. How do I get this set up into my own environment?
Yeah, great questions. We are actually showcasing this for the first time publicly. So we actually uploaded this into Sentinel GitHub repo. So it takes a while to sync into the the templates in Sentinel. So at this time, it's still not available yet on the templates in Sentinel, but it will be available soon in the next few days once the sync at the back end has happened. Now, if you would like to try this now, so you can actually go to the Sentinel GitHub repo, and under workbooks there is a advanced KQL JSON file. So this is the JSON file for the KQL workbook. So you can just copy the raw JSON codes, and what you can do is you can just click adding workbooks and edit, copy and paste the JSON file, and just click apply, and you can save the workbook in your environment.
Great stuff. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so this concludes the walkthrough scenarios, and let's wrap this up for today. Now, in summary, this workbook is a learning tool and not meant to be a cheat sheet. The goal of this workbook is to help you improve your KQL proficiency using a framework that focuses on Microsoft Sentinel use cases. Please give this a try today, and help us to improve this workbook by submitting your feedback. You can submit your feedback directly to us with the link at the bottom right of the workbook. It could be a suggestion for improvement or any missing category or sample query or even use cases that we should add to the workbook in the future. So as I mentioned earlier, at the time that we speak, is still not available in the templates, but once it's available, we will announce it through a blog. So keep an eye on the Microsoft Sentinel blog. So when we make the announcement, this recording will also be included in the blog as well. So with that, I'll hand it over back to Jason.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. So the team has been great answering all the questions. We do have one that I think would be worth elaborating on. And it is, please provide some information about how you would envision this being used by a MSSP that is running Lighthouse and many Sentinel instances.
Yeah, so if for MSSP running Lighthouse, so the buttons, right, the two buttons that mentioned actually works. If it's Lighthouse enabled, so you could choose the workspace belongs to your customer environment as long as you have the permissions. Now the workbook, you can choose to deploy the workbook in customer environment or in your own environment. So that's totally up to you. But with the Lighthouse enabled, you'll be able to pick or choose the workspace from your customer environment as long as you have the permission.
Perfect. I'd like to thank Innocent, Jeremy, and Prateek for being our guests today and for an excellent presentation. And thank you to the rest of the team who helped answer questions. At the same time, I would like to remind the listeners that the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements is to visit our landing page at aka.ms/security-community. And while there, you'll find easy ways to navigate and find the resources and learning content relevant to our security products and their communities. A good start would be browsing our bite-sized product videos, ninja trainings, recordings of past webinars, GitHub communities, and more. We'd love to hear your feedback on how we can improve these webinars. Please take a minute submitting your webinar feedback at aka.ms/security-webinar feedback. Thank you and see you next time. Goodbye.